2011, the Advancing Knowledge in Human Services Philanthropy and Nonprofit Organizations Initiative was launched with generous support from the Kresge Foundation, providing research grants to 10 pre-tenure scholars in U.S. universities. The Advancing Knowledge Initiative recognized that human services organizations provide essential services to low-income and vulnerable households. This initiative aimed to provide much-needed research and best practices to equip these nonprofits to fulfill their vital missions. The Advancing Knowledge Project aimed to build a research community of human services scholars whose work can improve the effectiveness of human services organizations and philanthropy. To accomplish this objective, scholars worked with mentors and an advisory council to disseminate their findings. The 10 scholars who received funding to help advance their work are Dr. Christopher Einolf, DePaul University; Dr. Nicole Esparza, University of Southern California; Dr. Eve Garrow, University of Michigan; Dr. Lori Goldkind, Fordham University; Dr. Jesse Lisi, Georgia State University; Dr. Kelly LaRue, University of Illinois at Chicago; Dr. Lindsay McDougall, Northern Illinois University; Dr. Brent Never, University of Missouri, Kansas City; Dr. Jennifer Shea, San Francisco State University; Dr. Gina Weisblatt, Northeast Ohio Medical University. In a moment, you will hear from Dr. Una Osili, Director of Research at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, with an overview of the project itself, followed by 5 of the 10 scholars who will discuss their research in their own words.
My name is Una Osili. I am Director of Research at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and also a Professor of Economics and Philanthropic Studies. Beginning in 2011, the school received generous support from the Kresge Foundation to launch a new initiative titled Advancing Knowledge in Human Services. The goals of the project were twofold. First, to build a community of scholars dedicated to building knowledge that would help improve the field of human services, and secondly, to share that knowledge broadly and to help improve practice within human service nonprofits. Next, we'd like to showcase some of the work of the Advancing Knowledge scholars. Jesse Lacey is at Georgia State University. Dr. Lacey has examined a new area, which is what determines the success of startups within the nonprofit sector. His research specifically identifies the factors that make for a successful social entrepreneur and startup. By studying his research and understanding his findings, donors, as well as nonprofits themselves, can better evaluate what makes for an effective startup organization within the nonprofit sector.
My name is Jesse Lisi. I'm an assistant professor in public policy and management at Georgia State University. The project I'm working on is related to nonprofit entrepreneurship, and it's a project that is trying to ask the question, who are the people that are starting the 50,000 new nonprofits that we have each year? We know a lot about the organizations that exist, but we don't really know where they come from. So this research was the first, it was an opportunity to try to really understand who the people are who are starting their organizations, what their origins are, where the ideas came from, what the early stage funding is, and how all the pieces fit together to create organizations that are going to be successful and grow over the long term. We surprisingly knew very little about nonprofit entrepreneurship before these surveys. A lot of the knowledge was based upon personal experiences that people had, case studies, observations of young nonprofits, but we were able to extend that to a survey that went out to 10,000 nonprofit entrepreneurs, and through the collection of that data, we have a pretty good sense of what's happening within these young organizations. We're really interested in figuring out what is helpful for people who are starting new nonprofits and what types of things are predictive of whether those nonprofits will be successful or not. There's a high failure rate for new organizations. It's no different in the nonprofit sector. We want to make sure that people's energy are spent on the projects that are going to have an impact in the long run, and try to find ways to help support them at this stage. So I think there's a big shift in terms of where the research is in the young nonprofits, moving away from just the growth of the sector in general to more of a maturation of the sector to more robust and more effective organizations. Several things are really important for effective organizations. Leadership is always going to be key, especially in the early stages. That founding team is going to be paramount. The governance, the boards make or break nonprofits. Understanding how the boards contribute to the startup process and also evolve as the startup ages is important for success. And then financing is hugely important. But also the support of the community was really important in terms of the early stages of the organizations. Just having the ties into the communities that they're working with, as well as the resources of the individuals starting the organization, were very important. The project has been really helpful in terms of moving my career forward. It's given me a lot of opportunities to work with other scholars in the field, exposure to the network of the other Kresge Fellows, which has been extremely useful, and basically just created some opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. In terms of building some bridges with other scholars, it started out as a focus on the nonprofit entrepreneurs, but through this initial data set and this initial research, I've had an opportunity to work with other individuals around the topics of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, and bring this knowledge of trying to create new nonprofits, applying that to some of the other instances of social enterprise that are pretty interesting right now. One way that we're able to share our research is we've created a partnership with the Foundation Center, which is a big nonprofit that provides a lot of resources to the sector. And we have created an online diagnostic tool. So now people who are interested in starting a nonprofit can go and take this diagnostic, and it tells them a lot of information about the different aspects of starting organizations, and they can actually get an assessment of their overall preparedness. And then based on this assessment, we direct them to different resources so that they can increase their knowledge in things like fundraising or governance or some of the market research, program development, things that are really important for the success of their organizations. So we've actually translated some of the findings into this nice diagnostic tool that can be useful for people who are in the process of starting new organizations. The opportunity to do the large survey and to talk with a lot of the individuals who are starting nonprofits has been a great entree into the overall research within the nonprofit sector, because it's given a lot of perspective on what's happening in these early stage organizations and what's happening in small nonprofits. It was interesting just having an opportunity to spend time with these smaller, more scrappy nonprofits and understanding how they are working with their governance structures, how they're doing fundraising, and it's very different than the typical nonprofit that we tend to study in case studies in the classes.
Lindsay McDougall is at Northern Illinois University. Dr. McDougall studies the size, financial health, and scope of nonprofit organizations within a given community. Her research also sheds light on perceptions of nonprofit organizations in a particular community. Through her research, nonprofits can understand better how they're perceived within their own communities, and they can also better understand how their own internal composition, their financial health, their size, scope, and complexity influence those perceptions.
My name is Lindsay McDougall. I am an assistant professor of public administration here at Northern Illinois University. When I first got the Kresge Award, I was in the School of Social Policy and Practice at the University of Pennsylvania. After receiving the award, however, I obtained a tenure-track faculty position at Northern Illinois University in the Department of Public Administration, and I recently obtained a tenure-track position at Rutgers University, Newark, in the School of Public Affairs and Administration. My colleague and I, Marcus Lamb, applied for the grant to look at community variation in the availability and financial health of nonprofit and human services agencies across communities in San Diego County, and to look at how this variation influenced individual and community level outcomes. And we looked at differences in how people viewed nonprofit organizations and differences in the fiscal capacity of nonprofit organizations from one area to the other. From the Kresge grant, we have been able to publish several articles relating to our research findings. We have also been able to develop a course on poverty in the nonprofit sector at the University of Pennsylvania, which took a lot of the findings that we had from our research and incorporated into a graduate class and kind of helped graduate students to understand how community variations in the nonprofit sector may affect issues of poverty and poverty alleviation. So ultimately, we find that the availability of nonprofit organizations matters in terms of how people come to view and understand the nonprofit organizations in their communities. We also find that more predominantly minority communities tend to have less fiscally secure nonprofit organizations, specifically human services nonprofit organizations, than predominantly white communities. So this tells us that many communities that may not have the same availability of organizations or the same fiscal health of organizations may not be able to provide the same level of services that other communities receive. I think the research that we have conducted is helping to advance the field of nonprofit sector studies in a variety of ways. There haven't really been any studies that have looked at community variations in nonprofit sector in terms of what implications do these variations have on individuals and communities. A lot of the studies that have been conducted simply look at variation in the sector but don't actually take it a step further. So our research takes it one step further and looks at what difference does it make that one community may have more or less nonprofit organizations than another, or what difference does it make that one community may have more financially secure nonprofit organizations than another. We want to look at the real implications of these differences and not just the fact that these differences exist. I think the ultimate goal of this research is to help nonprofit organizations to understand that although you may not have a large quantity of nonprofit organizations in your community, you may not have the most fiscally secure nonprofit sector, these differences do impact the communities that you operate in. And if you don't have a large availability of nonprofit organizations in your area, or you don't have the most fiscally secure sector, you may want to consider collaborating with other agencies in your area to kind of build up your capacity.
Nicole Esparza's at the University of Southern California. Dr. Esparza's research focuses on the issue of homelessness in the United States, and specifically the networks that are organized to help fight homelessness. Ultimately, her research can help funders, agencies, and policymakers better understand collaboration and structures of governance within networks around the issue of homelessness in the United States.
In this project, I study a national sample of 250 homeless service networks called Continuums of Care that are funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. I got interested in this project because a lot of studies look at organizational effectiveness with the organizations in isolation, but most organizations work within a network. So I'm interested in looking at network effectiveness. So how do the different ties and how do the different compositions of the network make it perform better for clients or provide more innovative services? In order to study many networks, you need a lot of data. And the Kresge grant has allowed me to collect a lot of data from both surveying network managers and then collecting their performance data. I also appreciate that the grant was for 2 years. So it allowed for 1 year of collecting data and then another year that allowed us to do something that's also important, which is to write up the results and to disseminate the information. The best part about the fellowship was meeting the other Kresge scholars. I met a lot of new colleagues and I made new friends, and these are all people that are also interested in improving human service organizations. Beyond the scholarly outlets for my research, the grant has allowed me to present my work to managers at HUD who actually fund and organize these networks. I've also been able to talk to managers of the organizations that work on the ground with homeless services and show them how the other networks can perform well, and so they can create some best practices. I think that my work has helped advance the field because not very many people have studied a lot of networks comparatively, and I've been able to look at a national sample through the help of Kresge, and we can really compare the different structures and how they can be more effective.
Lori Goldkind is at Fordham University. Dr. Goldkind's research focuses on human service organizations and their use of technology. In particular, she studies the use of social media as well as web technologies within human service organizations. By better understanding Dr. Goldkind's research, nonprofits and others that work within human services can better understand the challenges and opportunities that lie within technology for human service organizations.
So this has been a 2-year project called Untangling Web 2.0 in the Human Services. It was the first year as a national survey of human service providers around their social media use and how they use social media and web-based strategies for advocacy and for sustainability purposes. And in the second year, executives opted in to be interviewed in a more nuanced, more in-depth capacity around those same themes. So the first year was a survey, and then the second year was a qualitative interview. The grant has been a huge boost to the project. The project probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground without the funding from the Kresge Foundation and Advancing Knowledge. The grant has been both helpful on the resource side in real dollars, as well as connecting me to a mentor who's helped kind of conceptualize the project as well as extend other opportunities. So my tenure vote has not happened yet. It will happen in the spring of 2015. But in terms of my trajectory towards tenure, the project has given me a research agenda that's helped frame all of my scholarship moving from 2013 forward. So it's been a really positive experience. The project required me to find a mentor to help frame and conceptualize the research study, and that partnership has been incredibly fruitful. My mentor both helped me to frame the research as well as introducing me to other writing opportunities, and has also become a collaborator. His mentorship has been incredibly fruitful. The research from this project has been disseminated across national conferences at 2 or 3 national conferences since 2012, as well as being published in 2 peer-reviewed journals. And there's additional research that's coming out in the pipeline that will result in 2 to 3 additional publications. The data from this work is still being analyzed. It's a little premature to say that it will have direct impact on practitioners in the field, but along the way in the interview process, I was able to provide technical assistance to individual providers from this cohort of 25 people, and the hope is that the findings from this work will develop in curricula and other tools that can help agency leaders.
Christopher Einhoff is at DePaul University. Dr. Einhoff examines how life cycle changes and events within families help shape their decisions to give. Ultimately, by studying his research, understanding his findings, human service organizations can learn how to craft appeals and can better understand how changes in a family, such as the birth of a child, a marriage, and even separations within families, help change giving behaviors. Nonprofits in the human service sector can also learn how to craft appeals and ultimately build more sustainable fundraising practices.
My name is Christopher Einhoff, and I'm an assistant professor at DePaul University School of Public Service. My project looks at the human services and philanthropy and how that relates to the family. The family is where we learn generosity first, and then we apply that feeling of generosity outside the family by giving money to charity or by volunteering. So my project looked at those interactions between what's going on inside and outside of the family, and it had 3 aspects. In the first one, we looked at how changes in one's family life, so getting married, getting divorced, having children and your children of different ages, how that would affect your giving and your volunteering. We had predicted that when people have children or when children attend school, they will give more money to charity, but it'll be charities that their children participate in. What we found that to be true, but we also found that parents of elementary and middle school children were very much more likely to give money to human services charities, which we didn't expect. We expected people would just give to, say, the PTO or something else, the Boy Scouts that their children participated in. The second project we did a field experiment with fundraising letters, and we tried to see whether family-related language of different types in these fundraising letters was more effective at getting people to respond and make donations. We saw that fundraising letters that appeal to traditional family roles, so fundraising letters that mention women as being mothers, were particularly successful as compared to fundraising letters that had women in non-traditional roles. So this is not a victory for feminism or for the advancement of roles of women, but fundraisers can keep this in mind, that donors are more comfortable with that kind of role for women if you're going to do a case study of a client in your fundraising letter. In the third one, we looked at married couples and we interviewed them, and we asked them about how they make decisions about giving money to charity. Do they agree? Do they disagree? When they disagree, how do they handle the disagreement? And we found some of the dynamics were interesting. For example, When couples make small donations, they just make them as individual purchases. When they make large donations, they have to consult with their partner. A lot of times there's one partner who's sort of the gas pedal, the person who's likely to say yes to an appeal, and another person who's the brakes. Often the person who's the brakes is the person who handles the finances for the family. I would have not been able to do this project at all without the grant. It also paid for research assistants to work with that. This is one of the best aspects of the project. I got to work with a mentor, and my mentor was Eleanor Brown, who teaches at Pomona College. She's a professor there, and I had known Eleanor before from conferences, and we had talked about issues and talked about research, but we never worked directly together. And the mentorship really enabled me to approach her and work directly with her and get assistance from her. Her guidance is very valuable. The other nice thing about working with Eleanor is that my degree's in sociology and she's an economist. And when you have two disciplines working together, you make much better work. You look at problems differently and you think differently. Well, I'm very proud to report that the first article coming out of this grant on how getting married affects your volunteering and charitable giving has been published in the Journal of Marriage and Family. It's the first to use longitudinal data, so data collected over a period of time, to see how charitable giving changes with people's changes in marital status. So this is a methodological advance that's important. I've also presented stuff at conferences, and I'm working on other articles to present in other journals.